In 1976, the FDA quietly pulled a dye that was inside over $10 billion worth of food. M&M's literally stopped making red ones. The dye had been linked to cancer concerns in animal studies. And here's the part that should make you pause. Warning signs had been showing up years before it was finally banned. That's just one of the things your parents were eating every single week in the 1970s. And somehow, it only gets worse from here. Here's what you have to understand about food in the 1970s. Regulation existed, but it was slower, less aggressive, and often reactive. Corporate lobbying was everywhere, and the standard for safe enough was very different from what it is today. What we're looking at isn't just discontinued food. These are ingredients and products that were later restricted, banned, or heavily reconsidered, sometimes after years on the market. And in several cases, concerns were already being raised long before anything changed. Let's start with the one that kicked everything off, red dye number 2. In the early 70s, it was everywhere.
Red number 2 was being tested during that period, but it was recent experiments which could not establish its safety.
Cereal, candy, soda, desserts. If it was red, orange, or pink, there was a good chance this was in it. The FDA estimated it was used in products worth over $10 billion at the time. In January 1976, it was banned after studies raised cancer concerns in animals. Now here's the detail that stands out. Mars, the company behind M&M's, removed red M&M's before the ban was even finalized. They didn't bring them back until 1987, likely anticipating what was coming. And yeah, that one alone is a little unsettling. Same year, very similar story. Red dye number 4 was used in
How to DIY red food dye for all your Halloween-themed treats this year.
things like Maraschino Cherries, those bright red ones on sundaes and in fruit cocktails. It was also flagged in animal studies for tumor-related concerns. Manufacturers reformulated quickly after the ban. Today, those same cherries use red dye number 40, which, even now, still sparks debate. And that's kind of the pattern you're going to notice. Replace one problem with something we're still arguing about decades later. Now, this one's interesting. In 1970, the FDA banned Cyclamate, an artificial sweetener about 40 times sweeter than sugar.
Here's why you want to avoid artificial sweeteners like sucralose and saccharin.
It was in diet sodas, sugar-free desserts, all of it. The ban came after studies suggested a possible link to bladder cancer. But here's where it gets complicated. Cyclamate is still legal in Canada, the UK, and over 100 other countries today. Even after multiple reviews, the US never reversed the ban. So depending on where you are in the world, the definition of safe looks very different. Before 1960, root beer actually tasted different. The original flavor came from sassafras root. It had a deeper, almost medicinal taste that modern versions don't really replicate. The FDA banned saffron, the key compound, after it showed cancer risks in animal studies. Companies had to completely reformulate, so the root beer you're drinking today is just an imitation of the original. This is the yoga mat one. Azodicarbonamide, or ADA, was used to make bread softer and more consistent.
Azodicarbonamide that gives rise to bread with a deliciously soft, chewy texture.
It's also used in making things like yoga mats and other foamed plastics. Now, that doesn't automatically make it dangerous, but it definitely raised eyebrows. Some countries restricted or banned it as a food additive over health concerns. In the US, it wasn't formally banned, but many companies phased it out after public backlash, not because regulation forced them to, but because people found out. In 1971, the USDA banned beef lung for human consumption. The concern was contamination during processing. Lungs can trap unwanted materials that are difficult to fully remove. Interestingly, similar ingredients are still used in traditional dishes like Scottish haggis. But in the US, versions have to be modified. Raw milk, unpasteurized milk, was widely consumed in parts of the early 70s. Over time, regulations tightened due to risks like E. coli, salmonella, and listeria. By 1987, interstate sales were banned in the U.S.
People against the hazards of drinking raw, unpasteurized milk.
The United States has been pasteurizing milk for over a century. And
Today, rules vary depending on where you live. Some people still advocate for it. Others avoid it completely. It's one of those debates that never really went away. This one feels almost unreal. Fugu, a Japanese pufferfish,
The fugu, the poisonous pufferfish. You need a license to sell pufferfish in Japan.
contains a toxin that can be deadly if prepared incorrectly. Today, chefs train for years to serve it safely. But in the early 70s, regulations in the U.S. were far less defined, meaning in some cases, you were putting a lot of trust in the chef. DDT was widely used as a pesticide until it was banned in 1972. But it didn't just disappear. It built up in the environment, especially in fish. People who regularly ate certain freshwater fish in the late 60s and early 70s showed measurable levels of DDT.
See DDT in some really high trophic predators or animals that are really high up in the food web.
And in some areas, consumption advisories still exist today because it lingers for decades. Quick pause. If you're into this kind of weird, forgotten history, hit subscribe. There's a whole series of these coming. Now, back to it. For years, margarine was marketed as the healthy alternative to butter. Doctors recommended it, organizations endorsed it.
Most low-fat spreads, particularly margarine, contain what is called trans fatty acids.
It was made using partially hydrogenated oils, which contains trans fats. And over time, research showed these fats significantly increase the risk of heart disease. The FDA eventually moved to eliminate them from the food supply in 2018, not the 70s. Okay, this one's technically 90s, but the research started in the 70s, and it's too good to leave out. Olestra was a zero-calorie fat substitute.
The main ingredient is olestra. It passes through the body without releasing any fat or calories.
Sounds perfect, right? Except it came with a warning label on the bag. Olestra caused what the label actually described as loose stools and anal leakage. Let's just say it didn't last long. TV dinners were everywhere. You'd heat the entire meal in an aluminum tray. Some studies have looked at how aluminum can leach into food, especially acidic foods, during the heating process.
That concept would take all the frozen Swanson turkey and use it to create a pre-assembled turkey dinner in an aluminum tray.
The long-term health impact is still debated, but over time, the industry moved away from those trays. Almost every canned food in the 1970s had a BPA lining inside the can. It helped preserve food and prevent corrosion. But BPA can migrate into food, and it's been studied for its effects on hormones.
BPA is an industrial chemical that prevents food spoilage in cans. Phenol A is a known hormone disruptor.
Over time, many companies phased it out, though discussions around it are still ongoing. This one's just bizarre. In the U.S., Kinder Surprise eggs have been illegal for decades, not because of the chocolate, but because of the toy inside. It violates a law about non-edible objects in food. While Canada, the UK, and Europe sell billions of them with zero issues, bringing a chocolate egg across the American border is a federal violation.
In the US, guns, very legal. Chocolates with toys inside, very illegal.
Until the 1990s, many food cans, particularly imported cans and older domestic manufacturing lines, used lead solder to seal the side seams. Over time, small amounts could leach into food, especially acidic items. Today, we know there's no safe level of lead exposure, but back then, it was part of everyday packaging. In the 70s, saccharin, the sweetener in Sweet and Low, was everywhere. In 1977, studies raised cancer concerns in lab animals. It wasn't banned, but warning labels were required. For 2.5 decades, every pink packet at every diner in America had a cancer warning on it, and people kept using it anyway. Candy in the 70s was bright, really bright, but many of those colors came from dyes that were later restricted or banned after safety concerns. The system at the time was often reactive. Approve first, study later. then remove if needed. Chlordane was a pesticide used on crops and in soil. It was eventually banned after being classified as a potential carcinogen.
Chlordane was developed, and today it is considered to be one of the most effective insecticides for roach control.
But it persisted in the environment for years, meaning exposure didn't just stop overnight. And this is where it really hits. In the early 1970s, studies found measurable levels of DDT in human breast milk from environmental exposure, from food and from years of buildup. Levels dropped after the ban, but for a generation of people, their very first food contained traces of it. And that's the part that sticks with you. This isn't ancient history. This is your parents, maybe even you. What all of these have in common isn't that people didn't care, it's that the system worked differently, slower, more reactive, and sometimes warning signs took years to turn into action. So the real question is, what are we eating right now that people 30 years from now will look back on the exact same way? If you want more of this strange, forgotten, and honestly unsettling history, hit subscribe. And let us know in the comments, which one of these surprised you the most and what should we dig into next?